the whole thing is that, okay, by labeling it genetic, that takes the power away from anything else that could possibly influence the expression of those genes, right? So if you are a type 1 diabetic and you're interested in healing, if you're told it's genetic, that takes the power right out of your hands, right? The average person is not a geneticist, is not a lab coat, doesn't have their doctorate. They're like, whoa, that is way above my pay grade, right? So if you asked anybody on the street about what their understanding of what genes were, it'd be like, it's like, oh, the blueprint of the body, it's kind of become synonymous with, well, that's just the way it is, right? It's like, oh, well, it must be in your genes, you're stuck with it. So for a diabetic hoping for the possibility of healing, by labeling it, oh, it's in your genes, that immediately imposes restriction on what's possible for healing, right? Because, there's no known cures for something in the genes, right? That would be oxymoronic, because you can't cure your genes. They're your genes. The genes are what make you you. So that loss of control has cost us in curiosity in exploring alternative means of healing, right? Because again, it's in our genes. That's who I am. There's nothing I can do about it, right? So our imagination and our hope for anything better has immediately been impacted. So from then on, right, in that summer of 2001, we got that Cliff Notes version of why Bowie had developed type 1 diabetes, and that there wasn't anything we could do with that, and that we would just have to wait for the latest news on, gene therapy or transplants. So talking genes, I mentioned a little bit before, talking genes immediately takes the public's grasp of their connection to the solution away. If you say it's genetic, your average Joe is like, man, I have no idea about genes. There's no way I can influence my genes, right? They're just too complicated for me to be able to manipulate. But if you allow that question to stand, is it genetic? Or what does it being genetic mean? And just kind of sit with it. There are a couple meaningful follow-up questions that are worth having asked. And that is, what are those genes? And are you sure? Because again, is this like, oh, the scarlet letter, where it's just like, okay, if you've got this gene, then there's no question that's why you're diabetic. So I realized, I mentioned 2 years ago I started diving a little bit deeper. No one had ever asked that question, right? What are those genes that cause type 1 diabetes? What is that gene, or what are those genes? Like, is it one? Is it many? Is it a combination? What are we dealing with? And so I asked. And so these are the questions I came up with. What genes or gene combinations are tied to diabetes? Are they tied to anything else, right? Because again, most diabetics are not just dealing with diabetes. That autoimmune disorder comes with a family of other things, whether that be thyroid, whether that be gut health issues, whether that be, it could be just about anything, liver conditions. So what else are we dealing with? And why are those things, right? Like, so someone with Hashimoto's disease, which is a thyroid disorder, if there's a genetic tie to Hashimoto's, why are people with Hashimoto's not being told that it's genetic, there's nothing we can do about it, like type 1 diabetics? That was kind of my question. Why is type 1 diabetes different from other autoimmune conditions in terms of its genetic origins? And then does having those genes or that gene guarantee diabetes? Why or why not? And have there been advancements in our understanding of these genes since their initial discovery? Now, this last question is huge because I chatted with a friend of a family member who had just recently been diagnosed, and I asked them about what they were told in their endocrinologist, like basically their onboarding process. What was your onboarding process like? So I wanted to see what it was like now versus what it was like when I had it, the 20-year difference. And there was not a lot of difference. And that's alarming. Like, that's concerning. 20 years have gone by and people are getting the same story. We have no better understanding of the genetic nature of type 1 diabetes. And I've talked about this before in previous podcasts, but for when I started my TikTok channel sharing more things about diabetes, I got the attention of a lot of type 2 diabetics, and I was shocked at how little these people who had been dealing with this disease for years and years and years, how little they understood about the disease itself. So, it's like, oh, that's a problem in education, but is the establishment responsible, quote unquote, responsible for educating? Are they improving their understanding at all either? So I started to ask these questions and I started to look